For this 2013 Audi A6, the Audi dealership quoted a repair bill of $20,500. At that point, dealer gave up and pulled the car out, and eventually decided to sell it. Now here's where things get interesting, because the blogger bought this car for just $1,800 and towed it straight back home. That's insanely cheap. But obviously, there was a catch. According to the previous owner, the car would sometimes start up normally, but then randomly stall out. And after that, it might refuse to start for long periods of time. And even when it did start, it couldn't be driven. That said, there was one big upside, and that is, even though this car is about 13 years old, it has less than 100,000 miles on it. And both the exterior and interior are in excellent shape. According to the previous owner, and confirmed by the blogger himself, who checked the vehicle's service history, the car still wears its original paint, with no accident damage or major repairs. Now let's talk about what's under the hood. This engine makes around 300 horsepower, and it's equipped with a supercharger, which means it has serious tuning potential. With just a simple front pulley upgrade, you can easily push it to 400 horsepower. Some people have taken it even further, pushing this engine past 500 horsepower. But for this build, that's overkill. Stock power is more than enough. Now, as good as this car sounds, it does have one small issue. When you open the fuel filler door, you can see leftover adhesive inside. Clearly something was damaged here before, and the previous owner's fix was basically just slapping in some double-sided tape as a quick and lazy repair, without properly fixing the problem. At the bottom of the fuel filler area, you can also see water sitting there. And no, that's not fuel. The drain hole underneath is clogged, which is an easy fix later on. When the car was purchased, the previous owner was actually very thorough. He handed over to remote key fobs, along with one plastic key. This plastic one is an emergency key. If you ever lose the remote keys, this is the backup. It lets you use the mechanical key directly to unlock the car and still drive it. Most people just keep this one at home as a spare, just in case. Right now, the odometer shows 93,059 miles, which is roughly 150,000 kilometers. So now, let's try to start the car. Some of the electronics do power on, and the center screen pops out slightly before sliding right back in. But here's the main issue. The engine will not start at all. And you can't shift gears either. Even pressing the brake does nothing. Now this is where things get interesting. Why exactly is this car completely unable to start? At this point, the first step is to hook up a diagnostic scanner and see what fault codes show up. Initially, it's suspected that something on the transmission side is wrong, but the exact issue isn't clear yet. In the end, the scan data reveals that the transmission connector is not being detected, meaning the transmission can't be read. Then, while working inside the car, the blogger notices something unusual. There's this pink locking clip right here. At first, it looked like just a random plastic piece, but later, it turns out to have an Audi logo. That's when it became clear. This part must have come from somewhere on the car. Which makes you start wondering if someone had worked on this before and didn't fully reconnect everything, leaving clips and connectors unsecured. So let's check what's inside this bottle. Take a look at this. It's completely full of fuses, which strongly suggests someone was troubleshooting before, which means the fuse box had clearly been checked before. There was even a spare light bulb in there. Now the next step is to locate the fuse box. And honestly, I have no idea who thought this was a good design. There's plenty of room in the engine bay. Yet they decided to put the washer reservoir right here, and underneath that reservoir sits the car's main control computer, with the fuse box directly below it. So with the reservoir mounted behind all of this, both the computer and the fuse box are exposed to potential water intrusion. From a design standpoint, this really doesn't make much sense. So the reservoir is removed to inspect the computer, to check for any signs of water damage or evidence that the computer may have burned. Because if the computer is fried, this repair quickly turns into a nightmare, and a replacement module would be required. These control units are not cheap. $1,000 or more is completely normal. Fortunately, after a closer look, there is proper waterproofing around the computer, and the connector area appears dry. However, at the bottom of the module, it looks like some water had run down previously, leaving behind a bit of discoloration. That seems to be the case, but it likely didn't reach the internals. The connector itself still feels slightly damp, but there's no visible corrosion inside. So overall, nothing too concerning here. Next, attention turns to the fuse box. At this point, the leading suspicion is a fuse issue, or possibly a faulty starter relay. Especially since loose fuses were found inside the cabin. The pink clip the blogger is holding right now is actually a fuse retainer, used to lock the fuses into the fuse box. Its job is to hold this entire row of fuses securely in place. The blogger then searched online for reference images of the fuse layout, and that's when he realized this cover was urgently supposed to sit right here. During the previous inspection, it appears this piece was never reinstalled. So here, let's show everyone how this is actually supposed to be secured. They removed it and simply left it removed. After that, one must deal with the fuses. If you cannot determine which one exactly has blown, then pull them out one by one to inspect. For now, apply the method of elimination. First, rule out the starter relay as the issue, because the two relays are of the same model. Thus, swap their positions. With things like this, the chance of one failing exists, but for two to fail at once, the probability is relatively low. Change their positions and see whether the engine can start normally. First, get the engine to run. The rest can be investigated afterward as to why the transmission cannot connect. For when the vehicle cannot be started, there is little meaning in inspecting the transmission, even if you repair the transmission completely, and then the engine presents a major fault, costing more than this entire car. Then naturally, one would abandon the repair. After swapping the relay positions, the vehicle still showed no response. The condition was the same as before when attempting to start. Only some electrical components were powered. Then continue using the computer to read data. Next, proceed to inspect the fuses. Many friends may feel that this process is far too slow. Why were the fuses not checked earlier? Car repair requires handling matters one by one. And upon pulling the very first fuse, one discovers, it was blown all along. Once found, then simply replace it. For this sort of thing, it is best to pull them one by one along the row. Pull one out, then if it is fine, insert it back. Do not pull out a whole bunch at once. If you pull them all out together, putting them back will be a great ordeal, unless you took photos beforehand. At times, when vehicles are disassembled for repair, taking photos serves as an important reference for subsequent reassembly after repairs. Here, yet another fuse was discovered, and this one too was blown. However, inside that bottle within the cabin, there were previously many spare fuses, so one is simply inserted directly. Nowadays, on some vehicles, at the fuse box location, two spare fuses are also provided. Not bad at all. After replacing the fuse this time, it truly had an effect. The vehicle already shows signs of starting, yet after cranking twice, it did not fully start. This kind of situation indicates insufficient battery power. Previously, when reading data through the computer, this fault code was also reported. The battery was lacking charge. Now the engine has already started. Yet there remain some further questions. Namely, during a cold start, the cooling fan begins to spin wildly. Thus at this moment one must judge whether the vehicle has some temperature sensors at fault. But since the engine has already started, temperature sensors are but a minor matter. They may be ignored for now. Moreover, during the process of starting the vehicle, it was also found that the brake pedal felt less than firm. After pressing it all the way down, it would continue to sink slightly further. This thereby proves that there is likely error within the braking system. Thus, afterward, the braking system must also be inspected. At this time, let us once more read the transmission. Yet in the end, when reading via the computer, it still could not connect to the transmission. Therefore, it is now necessary to go beneath the car to inspect. For him, getting under the car here is rather difficult because there is no lift. He can only rely on a jack to first raise the vehicle and then place jack stands beneath. Here, once again, a reminder to everyone, when you lift a car with a jack and work underneath it, you must, absolutely must, use jack stands or on it as support, as a rigid and secure connection. Do not rely upon the hydraulic jack alone, for it carries the risk of sudden collapse. Do not think to yourself that such a thing has an extremely low probability, for even that 1 in 10,000 chance, if it befalls you, it may very well be a matter of life and death. Beneath the vehicle, with little effort, the source of the fault was quickly found. The transmission connector here had developed an issue. Moreover, when the dealer previously conducted their inspection, after discovering this problem, they did not receive this speed limiting connector. In other words, it was never plugged back in, because the pins within the connector had already burned. Many viewers might think, that is but a small problem, why not simply replace the connector? However, in cases such as this, if one follows the dealer's repair plan, it would likely require replacing the entire wiring harness. And with a vehicle of this kind, replacing the full harness may even involve removing the engine. Thus the repair cost continues to rise. The blogger simply took a few photographs in order to confirm the part numbers, so that he could purchase the connector and wiring. Afterwards, inside the cabin, he found the dealer's repair estimate. The previous owner had kept this document, yet the repair was never carried out. It amounted only to a diagnostic inspection, followed by a quotation. For the final quoted price was set at $20,500, an extremely high repair cost. This was also the reason the owner ultimately chose to sell the vehicle, especially given the series of prior faults, which would cause those without repair knowledge to firmly believe that the vehicle itself had suffered a major failure, and that its repair cost was unreasonably high, exceeding the vehicle's original value, rendering it no longer worth keeping in service. For the symptoms of its failure appeared to lie within the engine, and as many people well know, as for vehicles from the BB lineup, engine repairs are generally extremely expensive, especially overseas, where labor costs are frighteningly high. So for this car, based on the repair estimate and the issues the blogger personally identified, the problems are actually quite straightforward. They are not as complicated as they seem. According to the items listed as needing replacement on the repair sheet, he purchased the required parts. Here is a heater coolant circulation pump. The repair estimate had already stated that this pump was faulty and that it was leaking coolant, therefore requiring replacement. So the blogger simply followed the diagram and bought a brand new unit. Next, he obtained a wiring connector. However, this connector was from a 2017 model, and some of the pin positions did not match this vehicle. So he needed to remove all the pins and rearrange them according to the 2013 layout, although the housing openings are identical. Therefore, in order to remove all the pins smoothly, you cannot simply pull hard on the wires from behind. He specifically prepared a small black box, which contains tools for removing connector pins. He mentioned that this full set was inexpensive, costing only $5, and later on, this tool set can also be used when repairing other vehicles, effectively expanding his tool collection. In addition to this tool set, there was also a bottle of WD-40 and a box of black heat shrink tubing. Altogether, the total cost did not exceed $100, and now, with a repair budget of just $100, he intends to resolve a $20,000-$500 problem. At this point, the blogger routed the wiring harness from beneath the car up into the cabin, because by doing so, he could replace it much more conveniently. Under the vehicle, he would otherwise need to lie flat. Working like this is much harder, and it also involves repinning. Some of the wire colors here are different between the 2013 and 2017 models, so he needs to carefully verify that every pin is reconnected correctly, and that the pin positions must not be altered. Here, he is redoing the pin configuration, including rejoining the wiring harness. And when connecting the harness, heat shrink tubing must be slid on in advance. After the wires are joined, the heat shrink is pushed into place and then heated to seal. Once all the connections are completed, protective tape is wrapped around the outside. Here you can see the connector has been returned to the underside of the engine. This location is quite close to the exhaust manifold. So with this kind of routing, additional heat shielding may still be necessary. Here, WD-40 is sprayed onto the water pump connection area. The original water pump has not yet been removed. Once again, to be clear, this is the heater coolant circulation pump. He simply cleans around the edges, especially at the connection points. As mentioned before, WD-40 has a bit of a nickname, the Miracle Repair Spray. It really is very useful. Even at home, if you have a bicycle or an electric scooter, it's worth keeping some, spraying it into door locks, or on door hinges works especially well. Here, the old water pump is pulled off directly. Actually, when doing this step, it's best to prepare a few hose clamps to clamp off the hoses so that less coolant spills out. Otherwise, afterward, you'll need to top up the coolant again. Sometimes, if your hands are slow, the amount of coolant lost can be quite large. The hoses are then all reinstalled. The control wiring connector is also plugged back in. This area really is extremely close to the exhaust. Next, he connects the diagnostic computer. Here, they are preparing to start the vehicle and use the diagnostic tool to read data again to see whether communication with the transmission can be established. At this point, everything that could be done has already been done as thoroughly as possible. Finally, he clears the stored fault codes because he has now switched to a different diagnostic computer, not the one he originally used. He also introduces this diagnostic tool, explaining that it is better matched to this vehicle and provides more complete model-specific information. After clearing the fault codes, all the transmission shift indications return to normal and are now displayed correctly. At this moment, everything feels right. With $1,800, what could you really buy? Yet here it bought a full-size A6. And during the inspection of the vehicle, after confirming that everything was properly addressed, the front cooling fan no longer runs at maximum speed. At this time, the engine temperature has not yet risen, which proves the fan system has returned to normal. So there is no need to worry about checking the temperature sensors. Now, basically, all of this vehicle's major issues have been resolved. Only a drainage issue behind the fuel filler door remains. But that is a minor problem. At this point, the vehicle already has the ability to be driven and needs to be taken out for a test drive. As for the brake system, there is indeed air trapped inside, but that does not mean the brakes cannot function. So go in for a test drive at this stage. As long as you don't drive aggressively, normal driving is still fine. However, the brake issue as a whole will still need to be addressed later. Now it's time to head out for the test drive. And here's a reminder for everyone, during the test drive, all footage was safely filmed from the passenger seat and throughout the entire test drive. It was all done at night. So we'll skip over some of the test drive footage for the sake of this video. Here, reverse gear is engaged. The vehicle slowly moves backward. After sitting and used for several years, this car truly was an absolute steal. As for today's program, we shall share it with everyone up to this point. However, the repair of this vehicle has not yet come to an end. Tomorrow, we shall continue updating the next episode of this vehicle's repair, thus forming a complete repair series. We can no longer leave everyone hanging in suspense. Alright, after this car is returned to the garage, the blogger and his team once again inspect the engine. At this moment, a reminder is also given to everyone. If you do not possess automotive repair knowledge, and likewise do not possess the kind of repair conditions that the blogger has, as you can see, he has a small garage filled with a wide array of repair tools, including diagnostic computers. When you lack these conditions, you should be especially cautious about repairing luxury cars. Alright, that is all we'll discuss for today. We'll see you again in the next episode. Thank you, friends, for watching. Thank you all for your viewership.